Hello from the studios at Townsville Archiving. I'm Nathaniel Liu, and I'll be taking a look back and talking to some of our past TWA grant winners and talking about what the grant supported them to achieve for each of their collections. Today I am joined by Dominic Bliss from the Corinthian Casuals Football Club, who are the winners of the TWA grant in 2022. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Can you please provide a short overview of your organisation and of the collections you applied for funding for?
Yes, so the Corinthian Casuals are an amateur football club based in London. We're in Tolworth in southwest London, and we're a 7th tier team in English football now in non-league, but traditionally one of the most important clubs in the development of the game around the world. The Corinthians in the late 19th century were one of the best teams going. You know, they provided a number of England internationals. They hold the record to this day for the biggest defeat of Manchester United. And they travel to various places around the world, Europe, South America, North America, Africa, helping to grow the game and popularise it. Later on, they amalgamated with another amateur football club from London called Casuals to form the Corinthian Casuals. And so we applied for a grant because we have 140 years of collected archive material in various collections, including programs from some incredibly important games, tour guides, newsletters that were keeping people in touch with the, I suppose, week-to-week goings on at the club over those 14 decades of football, and photographs of some of the most important teams, players, and moments in the club's history. We wanted to digitise those things, preserve them for posterity and for future generations.
Yep. So how did you hear about the grant?
I heard about the grant because a couple of people who, I'm a historian as well, as a committee member at the football club and a journalist, and a few people had mentioned the idea to me because they thought the club might be interested in it. Other historians, other football historians, programme collectors, were aware of this grant because I suppose it's the kind of thing that's perfect, a perfect match. You know, you have football programs that go back generations and generations. People are scared to open these things because they're so fragile. If you can digitize them, you can access all the information within them. You can look at them all you want, but you can keep the original artifact somewhere safe. So I think people who were in the know about the archiving industry were quick to tell me about this because they knew it's something that I'd be interested in and that the club, by extension, would be interested in.
Yeah, that's great. How did this collection come about at first, and what kind of material was it made up of?
Well, I suppose it came about naturally because every time a football team plays a game, there's a programme. But Corinthian Casuals have always documented the goings-on at the club in newsletter format. So all of these things were already there. Club historian called Norman Epps had a huge collection of these materials that I mentioned earlier, you know, tour guides, photos, as well as the programs and the newsletters. And, you know, over the course of 140 years, we've had a few jubilees as well. And so the club released brochures to celebrate those jubilees, which included important articles, photos, and historical events. So those collections were, you know, built up over the course of time, and different people involved in the club throughout history, when they've passed away, have passed them on to other figures involved in the club, and they've been passed down by the generations. What we didn't have was a digital record of them. So it was perfect for us. The grant enabled us to digitize 2 decades worth of stuff. So we began with the era immediately after the amalgamation of the two clubs, because some of the people that played a huge part in that era are still with us today, but they're very old. And it was our hope that maybe we'd be able to combine the digitized material with audio and maybe video interviews with those figures from that era, in the hope of one day getting more funding in order to host an exhibition using that. So these high resolution digital scans that we got through the grant, we've already been using them in modern day programs to hark back to historical times. We can now use those photos and those images at the kind of resolution that enables us to print them so they can be enjoyed. We've used them for presentations. So we have small photos that we've now had scanned at such a high resolution that we can present them on enormous projector screens to people in museums and have been able to do that recently in talks at the local museum. So already we've seen great enthusiasm for these new images that people weren't aware of or had only seen a postcard size in the past.
Yep, I read on your website there was you kind of like did a call to action for people if they had any archive material to borrow them, right? Was there much contribution from that?
There was, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
incredibly. Lots of family members of former players got in touch, and many of them were offering programs and newsletters, which we had a complete record of in the previously mentioned historians collection. But there were other new things that we hadn't had before. So we were able to produce a matchday poster for the first time our club reached the FA Cup first round proper. We played Watford in 1965, and there was a poster. It wouldn't fit into a modern size, but it's something like A1, and it would have been up in town to promote the game at the time. Somebody had an original rolled up in the tube, and they were able to send that to us to get scanned. We also received some audio tapes of interviews that people had done, so we're able to include digitized versions of those tapes, cassette tapes of people talking at Jubilee dinners on radios. We use them in our podcast series. So we've got an audio visual archive we're now building up. If we hadn't put the search out for things for to be digitized by you guys for our grant, with our, as part of the grant, we would never have come across those audio files either, because it was part of the wider request that we put out. So we're now building a much bigger picture of our club's history because of that request.
Yep, that's great. So what are steps for your collection? Like any big plans now that they've been digitized?
Both online and a physical one at a museum space. And actually, in the long run, I think a club like ours that has played such an important part in the development of football. If we can get the right grant money for the structure, we'd like to have a permanent museum, a Corinthian museum. So these are all steps on the way to showing other people that we're ready to people that museum, but also to fill it with material. Having these scans and these digitized images and files, that's the first step on the way to showcasing what materials we have that we can provide for an exhibition space. The dream is to get a sponsor so that we can upload this all onto a website, a permanent Corinthian archive, so that journalists, historians, academics, former players and their family members, genealogists, can access all the information they want, keyword searchable, about players and clubs that we've come across in our history. That would be the dream. It requires further grants or further fundraising on our part as a club, but it's something we're determined to do. Maybe sponsorship.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to see what happens in the future about this then. Yep.
Thanks very much.
Do you have any final words or anything?
Only to say that I would very much recommend this to organisations that may think that it's this grant, to people who may think it's otherwise for academic institutions. Sports clubs are an incredibly important part of the social fabric of communities. And if people don't stop and make a permanent record of those historical moments of relevance and the people that helped to make them happen, they can be lost to time. So it's really important, I think, to digitize those records, even if you're just a local sports club, and make sure that the people who want to find out about their long lost family members, or even only people who are still alive today, they can do so by accessing them online, as well as having to find an old artifact that may be hidden away in a drawer somewhere.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure digitizing the material as well, because we'd never really do anything to do with like football clubs or anything.
Fantastic.
It was a good experience. Yep. So it's been an honor to have this conversation with you. And if anyone wants to know more about the Corinthian Casuals, since they do have a really deep history, I read that, then please check out their website. And I'm sure there's a podcast, isn't there?
Yes.
That you have here.
The website is Corinthian-Casuals.com, which is very, very important because there's a hyphen in the team's name to associate the amalgamation in our history. And there's a podcast called Broadway to Brazil, co-hosted by myself and Yarek Zaba, telling their history, which includes some of the audio material I mentioned.
Yep, that's great. Thank you very much. So if you would like more information about how you can apply for this year's grant, then there is a link on the next screen. So that's all from me. So thank you, Dominic, and thank you to everyone that watched this video. See you next time. Thank you.